You're going to be taken through a roller coaster ride of adventure and daring do. So strap yourselves in. You're in for a wild ride. So I'm an independent historian. I'm a filmmaker. I have relations that were in the 1916 Easter Rising.
It started for me with my own bloodline. My relative Arthur Green marched out of the John Boyle O'Reilly Hall in Dundalk with the Irish Volunteers for the 1916 Easter Rising. The very first line of his witness statement reads, "I was born into a Fenian family." Those words sent me searching for the man behind the hall, John Boyle O'Reilly, and ultimately led me to this extraordinary Fenian story. I made this documentary in my spare time over 6 long months, balancing a full-time teaching job with no budget, using every tool I could find, including AI to help resurrect these long-forgotten scenes.
Now, I don't know about you, but you watch movies like The Great Escape or The Escape from Alcatraz, but they pale into significance compared to the Catalpa Rescue.
In New Bedford, at the historic Seamen's Bethel, where the Catalpa's legacy still lives, I was honoured with a congressional certificate from the United States Senate for my contribution to the story of the Fremantle Six. In Boston, a group of new Americans were sworn in as citizens in a moving ceremony that honoured the rescue. Moments like those convinced me this tale needed to be told properly.
The reason why we're here tonight, we're here because we're doing a show on the Catalpa, and the Catalpa was Irish prisoners. Actually, they were Irish. They were free men. They were taken by England. They were sent to Australia, and immigrants in this country realised the sacrifice that them lads had done back in Ireland when they were caught for an insurrection, and they wanted to save them, and they wanted to bring them over here. And they brought them, they sent a ship from New Bedford.
Every immigrant arrives with 3 things: faith, hope, love. Faith of our fathers and mothers living still, in spite of dungeon, fire and sword. Hope for a new life, and love of our homeland. And
that's why we're here tonight. Now, the reason why you immigrants are here tonight is because I was encouraging people to come to the show, and I was telling them what I was about, and I was telling them, he says, I've got a friend who's a judge, and she's a federal judge, and her great-grandfather was a big part of the Catalpa.
Thus bestowing upon them one of our nation's highest honors, United States citizenship.
The motion is allowed.
Thank you.
On behalf of the judges of the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts, I want to be the very first person to congratulate you on becoming citizens of the United States of America.
This is the full interweaving saga. 3 connected prison escapes: James Stephens, John Boyle O'Reilly, and the magnificent Catalpa mission itself. What I love most about this story is that it stands as an inspirational reminder that no cage can ever contain a longing for liberty. When the odds are stacked impossibly against you, you just keep going. That truth still gives me chills. This is my visual memorial to those remarkable men. I've meticulously researched the finest books on the subject and let the characters speak in their own words as much as possible. It's the first full-length Irish history documentary I know of, made in part with AI, a true passion project. You can watch this 2.5-hour film or follow it chapter by chapter. The voice from the tomb, entering the tomb, the opening of the tomb, the escape from the tomb, and the silence of the tomb, which is a powerful final chapter which looks at their lives after the rescue and where they are buried. I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed making it. It's some ride.
As JFK once said, we celebrate the past to awaken the future. And JFK loved the poetry of John Boyle O'Reilly, who you'll be noticing in this talk. And he has stated, "It is well to love liberty, for it demands much of those who would live by it. No one in the darkest cell, the remotest prison, under the most unyielding tyranny, is ever entirely lost in bondage while there are yet free men in the world.
Where am I creep? Lift up your head. Remember all the tears we shed. Though tyrants marched where heroes bled, their chains shall rust, their power fled.
From broken stone and suffering's den, we rise as we have risen when
the old country will rise again. The old country will rise again.
They said it couldn't be done. That a prison built at the edge of the world was escape-proof. That men buried alive by iron bars, chains and distance were already ghosts. They were wrong.
In the 1870s, the British Empire stretched across the globe, its authority enforced by prisons, fleets, and fear. One of those prisons stood in Fremantle, Western Australia, a place deliberately chosen because escape was not meant to be possible. Thousands of miles from Ireland, thousands more from America, beyond hope, beyond rescue. Inside its walls were Irishmen, Fenians, soldiers of a failed rising, condemned not only to hard labour, but to erasure. The Empire believed time would finish the job where chains had not. But history has a habit of defying certainty. In America, far from those prison walls, a quiet, determined network was already in motion. Irish labourers, dock workers, veterans and exiles. Men who knew what it meant to lose a country, but not the idea of one. They had no army, no navy, no permission. What they had was Irish pluck and Yankee grit.
I'm here outside the Seamen's Bethel in New Bedford, about to give a talk on the Catalpa. And 150 years ago, the Catalpa left the shores of New Bedford in April 1875.
So the Catalpa Rescue, in my opinion, and in some of your opinions as well from talking to you, is one of the greatest escapes not just in Irish history, but in the world. Snatching Irish Fenians from the belly of the British Empire. And the mastermind of this bold mission, the man you see in the middle of that picture, was John Devoy. This photo behind me is of the actual Catalpa ship, which was used in the audacious rescue of 6 Irish Fenians from one of the highest security prisons in the British colonies in Australia. This escape took years of planning and months of execution. This is the greatest propaganda coup in Fenian history, and You might not know this in New Bedford, but in Ireland they don't know this either. Okay, and it should be screamed from the rooftops, and that's what we're going to do. So, when did this bold rescue begin? 150 years ago, in April 29th, 1875, a Protestant American captain with no Irish ties set sail from New Bedford, Massachusetts, on what his crew believed was a routine whaling expedition. Unbeknownst to them, they were part of a high-stakes mission that relied on absolute secrecy for success.
Part 1, The Voice, from the Tomb.
And in 1871, John Devoy, who's in America, at his New York office, receives a letter which would prove to be life-changing. It came from an imprisoned Fenian soldier called Martin Hogan, all the way from Australia. He begged for help. John Devoy did not answer him because he could not, at this point, offer any assistance. But in 1873, a second letter arrived from another imprisoned Fenian soldier, James Wilson, and this is the seed which sprung the Catalpa Rescue. Dear friend, remember, this is a voice from the tomb. In this living tomb, the cankerworm of care enters. That we have been nearly 9 years in this living tomb, it is impossible for mind or body to withstand the continual strain. I now, in the name of my comrades and myself, ask you to aid us. We think if you forsake us, then we are friendless indeed. As John Boyle O'Reilly said, no one in the darkest cell is completely lost if there is a free man. That free man was John Devoy. So before we go to the Catalpa, I have to give you backstory to this. So I'm going to bring you back 8 years to 1865, where John Devoy was appointed as chief organiser of the Fenians in the British Army in Ireland. Like to infiltrate the British Army. This is long before Michael Collins was doing this.
Ireland, the 1860s. Only 20 years had passed since the Great Famine. 20 short years since hunger had emptied cottages, since roads were lined with the silent evidence of neglect, since 1 million Irish were buried and 1 million more were driven across the sea. And yet, the world was expected to believe that Ireland was healed. It was not. Rebellion does not require permission. It grows in basements and back rooms, in whispered conversations and coded letters, in newspapers smuggled hand to hand, and in songs sung softly enough to avoid arrest.
The building that's above us here, the plaque, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, was founded here in 1858 by James Stephens on St. Patrick's Day.
The IRB was an oath-bound revolutionary organisation dedicated to the establishment of an independent Irish Republic. Its counterpart in the United States of America and Canada was initially called the Fenian Brotherhood, but from the 1870s it was known as Clan na Gael. The members of both wings of the movement are often referred to as Fenians.
John Devoy, he was appointed by James Stephens, who is founder of the IRB, the Irish Republican Brotherhood.
James Stephens, in October 1865, placed me in charge of the Fenian organisation in the British Army in Ireland. I concentrated my efforts on Dublin, the Curragh Camp and Athlone, and made arrangements as I could to have the soldiers in the other garrison towns looked after by local men.
Between 1865 and 1866, the Irish Republican Brotherhood was under sustained pressure. Leaders were arrested, newspapers were shut down, informers were everywhere, and confidence was shaken badly.
Among those arrested at the time of the seizure of the Irish people were Thomas Clark Luby, John O'Leary, and O'Donovan Rossa. The government hoped it would strike terror into the rank and file Fenian.
Stevens entrusted management of the IRB to Colonel Thomas J. Kelly. Stevens had escaped the raid on the Irish People newspaper offices. He was arrested with Charles J. Kickham in November in Fairfield House, Sandymount. James Stevens refused to defend himself in court and made fun of the efforts of the police to catch him. He wouldn't be in prison for long.
John Breslin had a conversation with James Stevens in the prison the day after the arrest and made up his mind at once that he was a superior man. The plan was very simple and effective and was Breslin's in every detail.
I would make an impression of the keys to James Stevens' prison corridor. Those wax impressions were sent to an optician and sworn Fenian. Next they would be sent back to me, and I would inform the Fenians all was ready where they would be prepared to collect Stevens when he appeared over the wall.
The keys were finally in Breslin's hands, but even at the last moment he was obliged to do some filing on one of them and to run some extra risk by fitting it to the lock of the door that Byrne, his colleague in the enterprise, could not open. The keys having been fitted, Colonel Kelly was notified and arrangements were made to receive Stevens on the outside of the prison walls.
John Devoy was asked by Colonel Thomas Kelly to recruit men to assist in James Stevens' escape from prison. Some of those would be involved in the Catalpa Rescue years later, such as Dennis Duggan, Michael Cody and Pat Flood.
The only guard was an attachment of Metropolitan Police. That night care was taken that they were given plenty of porter and they were in a heavy sleep on their chairs when the event came off. Strictly speaking, it was not an escape but a rescue.
In the deep hours of the night, when the prison breathed only in iron sighs and guarded footsteps, John Breslin slipped from the hospital steward's quarters. He opened the corridor door without a sound and found James Stevens waiting, dressed, steady, resolved. A revolver had been pressed into Stevens' hand, a last contingency in a plan that allowed no mistakes. Together, they moved with the unhurried calm of men who knew that speed invited suspicion. Down the stairs, across the yard, Breslin opening doors that were never meant to open. The wall loomed high, merciless, and the ladder meant to conquer it betrayed them, falling short by cruel feet. Stevens was hidden briefly in the sentry box, stillness masquerading his routine. Without panic, Breslin vanished and returned with long dining tables from the lunatics' hall, stacking them where a tool shed offered its narrow mercy. Before the final ascent began, he climbed, surrendered the revolver, scraped past glass, landed hard, and vanished into the dark beyond the wall. Breslin knew there was a tool shed on the other side of the wall which would help Stevens' descent. Breslin had also informed Stevens that there would be a smaller second wall to get over outside. Beneath the pear tree promised in whispers, Stevens threw gravel onto the circular road, a signal as old as rebellion itself. Shapes emerged. A rope flew. 4 men hauled. Stevens leapt and was caught by waiting arms. The head of the Fenian movement torn from the grasp of the crown in a single, breathless moment.
After Stevens escaped, I left the tables by the wall so the British authorities would know too late that there was an escape. I returned to the hospital inside the prison walls. I wore a pair of patent leather overshoes over my ordinary boots so that my real shoes would not be dirtied during the escape and so I wouldn't raise suspicion. I never attracted any suspicion. I stayed in my job for a full year until it was likely I would be arrested, so I quietly slipped aboard the Holyhead boat and made my way to Paris the next night.
He took no payment for the escape, only the required satisfaction of having outwitted an empire. And it would not be the last time John Breslin would make the British crown look foolish. The breakout of James Stevens saved the Fenian movement at its most vulnerable moment, briefly convincing many that the Fenian movement possessed a reach the authorities could not contain. After his dramatic escape, James Stevens, the founder of the IRB, arrived in the United States in May 1866. His main mission was to resolve deep factional divisions within the American Fenian Brotherhood, particularly between the supporters of John O'Mahony and the more militant Senate or William Roberts wing, while also securing funds and support for an impending rising in Ireland. Despite initial enthusiasm and large public meetings where he spoke to thousands, Stevens failed to unify the bitterly divided organisation or reconcile the competing factions. Pressure from American Fenians demanded immediate action in Ireland, but Stevens remained reluctant to commit without adequate preparation and resources, leading to growing accusations of hesitation and broken promises. By late 1866, his repeated delays and inability to deliver on expectations led to his formal deposition as leader of the movement in December. He was publicly denounced as a rogue, an impostor, and a traitor at Fenian gatherings. And he was replaced, forcing him to linger in New York amid threats to his safety before fleeing back to Paris. Stevens went into hiding and soon drifted abroad, effectively removing himself from the centre of events. John Devoy felt Stevens was given the greatest opportunity ever presented to an Irish revolutionary leader and failed to use it.
The IRB were not the B team of the IRA, it was actually the opposite way around. They subverted organisations. They would take over organisations from within. By 1865, Ireland had 26,000 regular troops of the British Army on its shores. 8,000 of those 26,000 were sworn members of the IRB. Number 1 Clare Lane is Peter Curran's public house, and it was the location where Devoy met and swore in Irish soldiers from the British Army into the Fenians in an upstairs room, that very upstairs room.
In Peter Curran's house, a picked group of soldiers had been brought to meet the famous Captain John McCafferty, who had served in the Confederate Army, in order to organise a cavalry corps under his command. There were 15,000 Fenians in the British Army in 1865. Of these, 8,000 were stationed in Ireland. At that time, more than half the British Army was Irish. Those who would gather in Curran's public house included James Wilson, born James McNally in Newry in 1836, who served 7 years with the Bombay Artillery before joining the 5th Dragoon Guards of the British Army, where in 1864 he secretly became a member of the Fenian movement. Intelligent and persuasive, he proved a valuable recruiter within the ranks. Another who would gather here was Martin Hogan, born in County Limerick in 1833, served with the 5th Dragoon Guards and secretly joined the Fenian movement in 1864 while still in British uniform. During his years in the army, he earned a reputation as a superior swordsman and proved highly effective in recruiting fellow Irish soldiers to the Fenian cause.
Also involved in planning a rising, that's a very young John Boyle O'Reilly, a daring Fenian within the British Army. He had recruited 80 fellow British Hussars and secured the keys to Hidden Gate. He was about to lead a cavalry charge for Irish freedom. Fenian John O'Leary had said that 200,000 disbanded Irish soldiers since the American Civil War are gasping to be at the throat of England.
Listen to this. Political tension in Ireland reaches a boiling point as new measures are proposed. We can't ignore this any longer. This could mean trouble for our brothers across the sea.
We stand together or we fall divided.
After the American Civil War ended, thousands of Irish-American veterans emerged, trained in modern warfare, familiar with logistics, command structures, artillery, and intelligence. The Fenian Brotherhood suddenly had a large pool of trained soldiers, officers with combat experience, and surplus arms, flooding the US market.
But in 1865, they waited too long. Hesitation and betrayal shatters the plan. All goes wrong. What could have been a bold uprising fades into another lost opportunity. And what was going on in America? Infighting. In Philadelphia, the Fenian Brotherhood split.
We must stand united, brothers, for the cause that binds us all.
One half of the Fenians in America were too busy planning an absurd invasion of Canada.
John O'Mahony fought to send aid to Ireland, while William R. Roberts plotted an invasion of Canada, each undermining the other. So one of them wanted to go to Ireland, another one says, no, we'll go to Canada and use it as a bargaining chip against the British to secure Irish freedom. Their rivalry, though, shattered the movement's momentum. It sabotaged a chance to infiltrate the British Army and turned a moment of opportunity into another missed strike for Irish independence. But the Irish infiltrators, as I said, waited too long. British informers exposed the Fenian infiltration, forcing the army to redeploy compromised regiments overseas, neutralising their potential impact. The rebellion was crippled before it even began.
We will frighten the American Fenians out of the country.
From 1866 onward, the ancient protection of habeas corpus, the right not to vanish into a cell without charge, was almost continuously silenced in Ireland, as the British state braced itself against the rising shadow of the Fenians.
You are a disgrace to this army.
Under the Coercion Act, ordinary law was swept aside. Men could be seized on suspicion alone, imprisoned without trial, and dispatched to military courts, transportation, or death. Across the country, known leaders were hunted down and consigned to prison. On February 22nd, 1866, John Devoy was arrested in Pilsworth's public house after Patrick Foley of the 5th Dragoons infiltrated the Fenians, triggering mass arrests and crushing the rebellion before it could rise.
Martin Hogan!
This court sentences you to
James Wilson! You are sentenced to death! John Boyle O'Reilly, this court sentences you to death! Order! Order! Robert Cranston, this court sentences you to death! Thomas Dana! This court sentences you to death! Michael Harrington, you are hereby sentenced to death! Thomas Hassett, you are sentenced to death!
These sentences would later be commuted, but in that room the law spoke as if death were already done. They would be condemned to the desolation of Western Australia's penal colony, Fremantle Prison.
Here you can see arrested Fenians led to Dublin and Cork prisons.
I was never a man of half measures. My devotion to Ireland was matched only by my love for Eliza Kenny. I met her in 1865 while recruiting for the Brotherhood around Naas. John Cahill of Watkins Brewery introduced us. She was a shapely brunette with intelligent, warm eyes, educated at a convent school, quiet in manner, steady in resolve. I fell quickly. We were engaged soon after. Her people lived at Tipper, near where I was reared, a small farm, her father also working in a mill, an old Irish Confederation man of the 40s. We shared an understanding without words. We walked the woods, talked for hours, and whenever I could escape Dublin, I took the night train, stepping off miles short and walking the rest so as not to endanger her family. Eliza carried messages for me too, past constables who never suspected her. In February 1866, knowing rebellion was close and arrest closer, I came one last time. I said farewell by the tree near her home. I would not risk her life. I did not know it would be 58 years before I saw her again. In prison, I wrote a long letter, 17 pages, releasing her from our engagement, yet promising marriage if she waited. I do not know if she ever received it. When I was freed, I did not return. 5 years of penal servitude had married me to a cause. Ireland became my wife, my home, my family. Years later, I was told Eliza had died, a childless widow who never left Kildare. That too was wrong.
To break the Fenians, a Captain Whelan, an Irish man but loyal to the British Crown, moves from prisoner to prisoner, and he wants them to crack. So he whispers that the man next door had turned informer. He squealed on you. You might as well give up all the information now. It was all lies. And that civilian spies were flooding Dublin Castle with secrets. But the men didn't crack. The Fenians were branded. They were branded as deserters. They literally had the letter D branded on their chest. So everyone would know for the rest of their lives just what was thought of them, and not very much. They were deported to hell. This is the Hougoumont ship. That's the actual ship that John Boyle O'Reilly and the 6 Catalpa prisoners mentioned were to be deported to Fremantle in southwestern Australia. And in October 1867, 63 shackled Fenians were sent aboard the Hougoumont. John Boyle O'Reilly was spared from the noose because of his youth. From the British point of view, we have an infiltrator in our midst. We can't encourage this. We have to be really, really strict with the punishment. Instead, we'll send him to Western Australia. Now, for an Irishman, that's hell. I'm going to introduce you to the Catalpa 6, just so you know who these are. So Thomas Dara from Wicklow was a decorated soldier, but he was also a former Orange man who served the British Crown in China and Africa, secretly embraced the Irish Republican Brotherhood, recruiting British troops into the Fenian cause. He was arrested for mutiny in 1865. He was sentenced to death, later reduced to life. And the next person that we have is Thomas Hassett. And Thomas Hassett is a battle-hardened soldier from Cork. Again, a British soldier. And he had sworn hundreds into the IRB, and he plotted to seize Dublin's defences. He was betrayed, and that sealed his doom. He was surrounded and captured, faced court-martial with defiance, but his death sentence was reduced to life. Michael Harrington was a battle-hardened veteran who served in the 61st Regiment in Calcutta, India, again for the British. But again, he was with the IRB. He deserted in 1866 to join the Fenian Rising, only to be captured and condemned to death. His sentence was reduced to life in penal servitude. Now remember, John Devoy has recruited all these people. Robert Cranston is next, from County Tyrone, a soldier of the 61st Regiment. He was betrayed by an informer in 1866. He's court-martialed and sentenced to death, later reduced to life in penal servitude. And James Wilson, the voice from the tomb, born in County Down, a battle-tested artilleryman who fought in the Bombay and 5th Dragoon Guards for the British, but was actually a Fenian, recruited by John Devoy. He deserts in 1865 to fight for Irish freedom, but was captured and sentenced to death. And though his sentence was reduced to life in penal servitude.
Of course, Catalpa prisoner number 6 was Martin Hogan. There were Fenians on board such as Thomas McCarthy Fennell, James Keeley, and Dennis Cashman. One of the soon-to-be most famous Fenians, and destined for Australia, would be a John Boyle O'Reilly.
These are some of the cells that would be on the lower deck of a convict ship. And in October 1867, 63 shackled Fenians were sent aboard the Hougoumont, the last convict transport to the British colonies of Australia.
My name is John Boyle O'Reilly. Only those who have stood within the bars and heard the din of devils and the appalling sounds of despair, blended in a diaspora that made every hatchment a vent of hell, can imagine the hold of a convict ship. Our chains were knocked off from the soldier line decks, and we were ordered to go below. The sides of the main hatchway were composed of massive iron bars, and as we went down, the prisoners within clutched the bars and looked eagerly through, hoping, perhaps, to see a familiar face. As I stood in that hatchway, looking at the wretches glaring out, I realised more than ever before the terrible truth that a convict ship is a floating hell. The forward hold was dark, save the yellow light of a few ship's lamps. There swelled up a hideous diaspora from that crowd of wretches. The usual prison restraint was removed, and the reaction was at its fiercest pitch. Such a din of diabolical sounds no man ever heard. The door was open and we entered. Then the door was closed, and we were with our friends, our brothers. Great God, what a scene that was, and how vividly it arises to my mind now.
For the next 3 months, this ship would be their prison.
They actually separated them from common criminals because they actually thought they'll turn the common criminals against everybody on the ship. They were actually more dangerous than the common criminals.
Hardened by failed escape attempts in English prisons, John Boyle O'Reilly now found himself among Fenian prisoners, treated with a dignity denied to ordinary convicts.
So it was not meant for their safety, but it was to stop their cause from spreading.
We were allowed to roam the boat freely. To relieve the boredom of doing nothing, we began to hold concerts amongst ourselves through song and poetry.
We are far from our land.
The people on the ship needed to keep these guys occupied. So what did they do? Well, they let them write their own newspaper. How do you keep hope alive when chained and exiled across the world? Well, aboard the Huguenot, the Fenians found unlikely allies among former comrades in the British Army, and kept their spirits alive by creating the Wild Goose. It's filled with poetry, jokes, those kind of things. It was a makeshift newspaper inspired by Ireland's legendary exiled warriors, the Wild Geese.
Part 2. Entering the Tomb.
This here is Fremantle Court. And a thriving little town.
The ship finally dropped anchor on the 10th January 1868 at Fremantle, Western Australia.
Comptroller General of Convicts at Fremantle Prison, John Hampton, inspected the Fenians on board the Huguenot from a tugboat. His reputation has preceded him as a strict disciplinarian. Fremantle Prison was the last convict prison built in Australia, constructed in the 1850s from local limestone by convict labour. It contained over 500 cells, 4 large dormitories and both Protestant and Catholic chapels. reflecting the rigid and sectarian world of the penal system. Between 1788 and 1868, more than 160,000 convicts were transported to Australia.
So what kind of prison offers no hope beyond its walls? It was a massive, fortress-like structure designed to house up to 1,000 convicts in cramped, windowless cells. Now, escape was a death sentence in itself. I mean, on one side you had shark-infested waters, and on the other side you had the merciless Australian bush, where starvation and brutal heat would kill you anyway, because the heat would reach up to 120 degrees, and that would make survival impossible.
And life at Fremantle was dominated by hard labour on colonial works or in prison workshops. Discipline was harsh and unyielding, enforced through strict rules and brutal punishments, such as flogging with the cat o' nine tails and birching. This institution had a history and culture of brutality. One of the governors had been John Hampden.
And he ensured that life inside became just as unbearable as the wasteland beyond. Governor John Hampden's brutal rule over Fremantle Prison was marked by relentless floggings, solitary confinement, and shameless nepotism.
This is for your defiance!
The staff and the line with its ruddy flash, like a threat or an evil bud, were a monstrous whip with a crimson lash, fit sign for the penal code.
He oversaw the flogging of 96 convicts. Those 96 convicts endured a staggering 6,559 lashes in total. He revived the cat o' nine tails with vicious regularity. An escape attempt would mean 100 lashes and months of near starvation in isolation. Prisoners were also kept in leg and body chains, weighing over 40 pounds. They cleared woods, they built roads, they constructed courthouses and lighthouses under brutal conditions. Punishments were severe, death a constant threat. They were despised by both guards and townspeople. On the one side, like I say, you have the shark-infested seas, on the other the Australian bush. And not only that, if you did escape to the Australian bush, what did it have? Aboriginal trackers to track you down, because they were being paid by the British to find anybody who escaped. But this is the inside of the prison cells. Okay, now you notice there's no bed, it's a hammock.
John Boyle O'Reilly was deeply moved when he learnt about the Manchester Martyrs' execution after receiving a smuggled newspaper in Fremantle Prison. In 1867, back in Ireland, the Fenian Rising collapsed almost as quickly as it ignited.
Reload! Hold steady!
Its most enduring drama unfolded in England, where two imprisoned Fenians, Thomas J. Kelly and Timothy Deasy, had already escaped police custody and become the objective of an intense manhunt. Their rescue in Manchester, when a Fenian unit intercepted a prison van, ended in chaos and tragedy after a police sergeant was shot dead during the attempt to force the lock. In the aftermath, Manchester Martyrs William Philip Allen, Michael Larkin and Michael O'Brien were tried, condemned and publicly executed. John Boyle O'Reilly immediately composed the poem The Dead Who Died for Ireland.
The dead who died for Ireland, the noble ones, the best, who gave their lives for motherland, who poured upon her breast in freedom's cause the blood she gave, who with their dying breath sent prayers to God to heal her woes, then sealed their love in death. The dead who died for Ireland, how hallowed are their graves. With all the memories fresh and green, Oh, how could we be slaves? How could we patient clang the chain? How could we fawn and bow? How could we crouch like mongrels 'neath the keeper's frowning brow?
There's an assassination attempt on the royal family in Australia.
The first British royal to set foot on Australian soil during his inaugural international tour was Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, second son of Queen Victoria. In 1868, aboard the steam frigate HMS Galatea, he traversed the colonies Adelaide, Melbourne, Hobart, Brisbane and Sydney. Everywhere he went was met with further acclamation. Despite whispers of sectarianism and unrest, he attended a charitable picnic at Clontarf, Australia, organised by barrister William Manning to benefit the Sydney Sailors' Home.
A civilian called Henry James O'Farrell attempted assassination.
There, an Irishman, Henry James O'Farrell, a man long afflicted by grave mental instability, advanced and discharged a pistol at close quarters. The bullet struck the prince's back, glanced off the ribs, and caused only a minor wound. O'Farrell, though plainly deranged, was rescued from the mob's wrath and arrested. The prince received devoted care from Lucy Osborne, the newly arrived superintendent of Sydney Hospital. The incident, occurring amid existing fears of Fenian outrages reported from England and fresh from Orange Catholic violence in Melbourne, ignited a fierce backlash. Indignation meetings drew thousands, 20,000 in Sydney alone the following day. With daily gatherings spreading nationwide, the press, led by the Sydney Morning Herald, stoked the outrage. Parliament, guided by Henry Parkes, enacted the Treason Felony Act and searched fruitlessly for a conspiracy. Though the Prince himself urged that clemency be sought from the Queen, mercy was refused. O'Farrell, despite his evident mental derangement, was convicted of attempted murder and hanged at Darlinghurst Jail on the 21st of April.
So you can imagine the reaction that these prisoners are going to have now in prison.
By the time Governor Henry Wakeford took charge in Fremantle as Comptroller General of Convicts in Western Australia, the screams had already done their work. Flesh broken, spirits bent, discipline and force, not by law alone, but by terror, carefully administered. Wakeford did not end the cruelty, but he cooled its fury, allowing the lash to fall less often.
Obey your senior officers is the golden rule. Trespass on no injunction. Avoid insolence and insubordination. Do as you are bade. Cheerfully and willingly, and your good conduct will one day be rewarded by getting your sentences remitted as provided by prison rules and regulations.
O'Reilly is transferred to Bunbury, 166 kilometres south of Fremantle.
Removed from the road gang by the Bunbury warden, Henry Woodman, John Boyle O'Reilly was repurposed as clerk and courier and trusted with carrying official messages, under threat of punishment should he fail in punctuality. Yet even as he walked colonial roads with letters in his coat, his mind was fixed on escape.
You know when you get pushed around too much, you're just like, that's it, I've had enough, I don't care, whatever the consequences, be damned, I'll do whatever. He decided enough is enough. He made up his mind, I'm going to escape, I don't care what happens. He met Cavan-born Father Patrick McCabe, who was visiting prisoners and developed a friendship with O'Reilly.
No one knew my mind.
He confided in Father Patrick McCabe, rumoured to hold Fenian sympathies, only to be warned that flight from Australia was often a slower form of suicide. Seeing the depth of O'Reilly's resolve, McCabe relented.
Don't think of that again. Let me think out a plan for you. You'll hear from me before long.
Still under suspicion in the tense aftermath of the Prince Alfred assassination attempt, O'Reilly was harassed and accused of delays by the chief warder.
You can read this letter in 6 months, O'Reilly.
Now, for anyone who knows what black border envelope means, it it means there's a death in the family. It's called mourning stationery. It would be months before John Boyle O'Reilly found out that his mother had died. For refusing to accept an anti-Irish insult in Fremantle prison, Martin Hogan was sentenced to 6 months of solitary confinement in Fremantle, shackled in chains the entire time. Like, he's already in solitary. Do you really need to put him in chains as well? Well, they thought so. And he survived on only bread and water. 6 months.
In that same year, 1868, O'Reilly formed a forbidden attachment to Jessie Woodman, the warden's daughter, which was tender, reckless, and doomed.
I wish you were not so fond of kissing. I'm in love up to my ears.
Jessie was destined for another, George Pickersgill, and may already have been carrying O'Reilly's child. The loss broke him. In despair, he cut the veins of his left arm, an act of surrender which he survived. When he recovered, Father McCabe moved at last to honour his word, if need be to risk excommunication itself, to aid a Fenian prisoner. John Boyle O'Reilly was granted the position of party constable in the Bunbury Work Party. Father Patrick McCabe quietly set events in motion by seeking the help of James Maguire, a man of standing and nerve. While Maguire, chairman of the Dardanup Roads Board, was clearing ground that would later become the Bunbury Racecourse. O'Reilly, each week, he carried his warder's report into the Bunbury depot at the old police station. It was on one such journey that Maguire, acting for Father McCabe, hailed him on the road and calmly revealed that a plan for escape was ready.
He drew out a card from his wallet on which Father McCabe had written a few words to me. The American whalers, he said, would touch at Bunbury for water in February. It was then December. And he was going to make all arrangements with one of the captains for my escape.
Now, the risk for John Boyle O'Reilly is immense. 100 lashes of the whip. Now, just to let you know what that would be like, because there's a very, very graphic description of what 100 lashes of the whip would be like. Floggings were described by Fenian Thomas McCarthy Fennell as this: with each lash, the laceration seems to change from blue to intense black. The flesh tears apart. It's now red. It ghastly flows the purple fluid from the mangled pulp. After such a flogging, the convict would then have their backs rubbed with salt. How does one man defy an empire? Well, John Boyle O'Reilly's daring 1869 escape from Western Australia, aided by local allies and smuggled aboard a gazelle, became an 8-month odyssey of survival, near capture and sheer resilience.
In February 1869, O'Reilly escaped from his work party, met up with Maguire and rowed to a secluded beach where a rowboat waited. They rowed for hours until noon. O'Reilly was suffering dreadfully from thirst. It had been arranged to lie in wait for the HMS Vigilant on the further shore, and then to ride out towards her as she passed. They wandered for hours through dried swamps in search of water. Hundreds of paperbark trees were examined for water, but not a drop could be found. John Boyle O'Reilly was desperate, weak with thirst, faint with hunger. Jim Maguire promised to return with water and food. Left alone, O'Reilly built a rough bed of boughs and leaves beneath the peppermint trees, their scent shielding him from ants, snakes and centipedes. O'Reilly drew on skills learned from the Aboriginal people. He hunted and killed a large possum for food. The next morning, his friends found him. Together they rowed out to meet the Vigilant, the ship secretly arranged by Father McCabe and Maguire to carry him to freedom. As they neared the open Indian Ocean, hope surged. Suddenly, the Vigilant changed course. She turned away. The men shouted, waved, even raised a white shirt on an oar. No reply. The ship sailed on, vanishing into the distance. Heartbroken, they returned to shore. To protect O'Reilly, Maguire enlisted the buffalo herder, Jackson, to supply him in the bush, while police and Aboriginal trackers closed in. O'Reilly refused to give up. He secured a small, frail dory boat hidden in the sand and rowed alone into the blazing sun. His food had turned rotten. Sharks tore at what little he had left, but yet he pushed on until at last he saw her, the ship, the Vigilant, close enough to hear voices on deck. He shouted with everything he had. Nothing. The Vigilant sailed away once more. Exhausted and broken, O'Reilly dragged himself back to the beach, while sympathetic settlers sent the searching troops in every direction but the right one. O'Reilly was forced to hide in the sand dunes in the scorching sun with little fresh water for weeks, while McCabe and Maguire organised another rescue. Eventually, Father McCabe found another whaler, the Gazelle, to carry John Boyle O'Reilly to safety, paying Captain Gifford £10 to carry John Boyle O'Reilly safely as far as Java. After 5 tense days in hiding, John Boyle O'Reilly was heartened by the arrival of seeing Jim Maguire and his steadfast companion. However, a great threat loomed. The dangerous convict Martin Bowman, described as one of the worst characters in the colony and a wretched criminal, had uncovered the escape plan and forced his way into the party through blackmail. At dawn the next morning, Jim Maguire and the men, with John Boyle O'Reilly, rowed out to meet the departing whale ships. John Boyle O'Reilly was pulled aboard the Gazelle by the strong arms of third mate Henry Hathaway, while his brave friends called out their final blessings and farewells from the boat below, and then sailed to freedom. On board the Gazelle, John Boyle O'Reilly found an unexpected ally in third mate Henry C. Hathaway, who took the fugitive into his own quarters, and they had a friendship that would last a lifetime. While smoking cigars at night, Hathaway would tell O'Reilly about his brother, who died at Gettysburg. As their friendship deepened, O'Reilly's restless spirit reignited. He repeatedly begged Hathaway to let him join a whale hunt. He finally got his chance.
There she blows! There! A whale!
But a whaler's heart fears not the dark, nor the wrath of the deep sea eye. Oh, haul, boys, haul, let the harpoons gleam through the thunder's breath and the ocean scream. For oil and gold and a tale to tell, we dance on the edge of a rolling hell. Oh, pull, boys, pull, hear the great ropes sing. We chase the might of the ocean's king. With iron and fire and a fearless hand, we conquer the beasts of a godless land.
The massive whale suddenly erupted beneath them, smashing the boat to pieces with 4 thunderous blows of its flukes. O'Reilly was struck hard and disappeared beneath the waves, while Hathaway clung desperately to a shattered section of the keel. Spotting his friend floating just below the surface, Hathaway lunged across the wreckage, grabbed him by the hair and hauled him aboard the floating debris. For 4 hours they drifted 12 miles from the ship as Hathaway fought to revive the unconscious O'Reilly, pounding seawater from his lungs until rescue finally arrived. 2 months later, more danger, at the remote British island of Rodriguez, authorities boarded the Gazelle, demanding the fugitive convict by name. Comptroller General of Fremantle Prison, Henry Wakeford, had sent a letter to governors of Mauritius and Rodriguez that they search the Gazelle should the ship arrive in their territory. Hathaway boldly claimed the man they sought had already died in the Sunda Straits, but the inspectors insisted on searching the crew.
You are under arrest.
Criminal Martin Bowman, who'd gone onto the ship with O'Reilly, was informed upon by one of the Gazelle's crew.
Goodbye, shipmate!
O'Reilly knew that Bowman would use him as a bargaining chip with his captors, and that was only a matter of time before they would return. O'Reilly became half crazy to Henry Hathaway. My God, it's all up with me. What can I do? They'll come back for me, but I'll never be taken alive. Hathaway decided on a plan. O'Reilly would walk across the darker reaches of the deck, holding a small grindstone. He would lean over the rail and throw the grindstone and his hat overboard, and then slip down the stairs to hide in the locker. Henry Hathaway's plan would engage the night watch. He would stand so to obstruct the view of O'Reilly. He had also told the watch to keep a close eye on O'Reilly as he was suicidal. Four boats were loaded and searched the water for an hour. They only found O'Reilly's hat. When Hathaway's boat came back, he found the second mate leaning over the side and crying bitterly. He's gone, the poor fellow. Here's his hat. The next morning, as expected, a police boat arrived, and criminal convict Bowman ready to identify John Boyle O'Reilly. There's grief on board the Gazelle. The flag is flying at half-mast. O'Reilly's wet hat lay in the hatchway. The crew had the unshakable belief that John Boyle O'Reilly had been drowned. This was enough to convince the officials, and the search was called off. Only after the Gazelle sailed safely away from Rodriguez did Hathaway open the locker and tell John Boyle O'Reilly, "Come out, you're safe for this time," having twice saved O'Reilly's life in a matter of months. Upon reaching St. Helena, Captain Gifford of the Gazelle arranged for O'Reilly to leave the ship and transferred him under the alias John Sewell to the American bark Sapphire, which was bound for Liverpool, also pressing him to accept ready money as a gift that O'Reilly later repaid years later. After remaining undercover in Liverpool, O'Reilly secured a berth on the ship Bombay and stepped ashore in Philadelphia on November 23, 1869, exactly 2 years after boarding the Hougoumont for Australia.
And by the time he reaches Philadelphia, he was no longer just an escaped convict. He was a symbol of Irish defiance, whose story would help inspire the legendary Catalpa Rescue. What was happening outside of this was a growing amnesty movement was happening.
On your feet. Release our patriots!
Fueled by outrage over brutal prison authorities' treatment for the Fenians. It gained unstoppable momentum when O'Donovan Rossa was elected MP for Tipperary in 1869 while in prison.
Our voices will shake the foundation!
So they're becoming a headache for the British Empire even when they're in prison. So what did they do? Well, they decided British Prime Minister William Gladstone granted a conditional pardon to the Fenians. but only if they lived in exile for the remainder of their sentences, so outside of the British Empire. But the thing is that the Duke of Cambridge refused clemency for military Fenians.
The Duke argued that releasing soldiers convicted of treason would be subversive of discipline in the army.
If you're trying to look at it from the British point of view, if they let these guys go, that's only going to encourage other members of the British Army to defect.
Sir William Harcourt, Britain's Home Secretary, later recognised that there is an Irish nation in the United States beyond our reach, and yet within 10 days' sail of our shores. Just over 20 years after 1 million Irish were driven across the Atlantic Ocean, an exile forced by British misrule and neglect, history turned upon its very authors. The Irish in America had become a power beyond Britain's reach. In seeking to weaken Ireland, the Empire had instead forged the very force that would one day answer it.
Now, this is an illustration of the Grand Procession in New York, honouring the Cuba Five who arrive, like the John Devoys and the O'Donovan Rosses. People like John Devoy and O'Donovan Rossa, they make it to America. They're known as the Cuban Five because of the ship that they're on, but in 1871 the Amnesty campaign secured the release of political Fenians like O'Donovan Rossa and John Devoy, and they were hailed as heroes in America. They're met with a hero's welcome in New York, celebrated by the city's Irish community and even honoured by the US House of Representatives. This celebration will have a far-reaching effect for the Fremantle Six still in prison, because the news even reached them in Australia about how big a success that the Fenians had when they reached New York. So I'm going to start looking at how we opened the tomb.
Part 3. Opening the tomb.
As I mentioned at the very, very start, months after arriving in the US, John Devoy receives a letter from Martin Hogan in Fremantle Prison, desperate plea that reminded him freedom had not reached everyone. Like, remember, it's kind of John Devoy's fault that these men are in prison, so he's haunted by this. Okay, military Fenians still languish in brutal captivity. John Devoy is now a journalist in the US. And he's haunted by the suffering of the Fenian soldiers left behind. And he says, he vowed, I felt that I, more than any man then living, ought to do my utmost for these Fenian soldiers. Though convincing Clan na Gael to fund the rescue seems impossible, he sent word to Fremantle Prison. He promises them to try to rescue them. While the prisoners, starving and forgotten, clung to this, desperate hope from their cells. Thomas Hassett, though, wasn't going to wait, one of the Catalpa Six. He couldn't wait any longer. He made a daring escape to Bunbury, but when the promised payment for passage never arrived, he was abandoned, captured as a stowaway, sent back to Fremantle Prison, and under heightened security, he's condemned to the brutal chain gang. So, as I said before, you have the second voice from the tomb. What happens when a man trapped in a living tomb refuses to be forgotten? The power of the pen. This is it. Fenian James Wilson first wrote to John Devoy with an escape plan suggesting a ship disguised as a whaler, and the use of horses to flee through the bush, but John Devoy never replied to that. Wilson sends a second letter. Dear friend,
Remember, this is a voice from the tomb.
That we have been nearly 9 years in this living tomb, it is impossible for mind or body to withstand the continual strain. I now, in the name of my comrades and myself, ask you to aid us. We think if you forsake us, then we are friendless indeed. And with haunting words of loyalty, he reminded Devoy they were still soldiers of liberty. A message that would finally stir the exiled Fenian John Devoy into action. Now, John Devoy's mission impossible begins.
Clan na Gael had become the natural successor as an organisation to the Fenian Brotherhood in America. They were reluctant to help Devoy. America had recently fallen into a severe recession in 1873. Severe unemployment would become a major issue in Clan na Gael's fundraising. Also, everything looked like it would go horribly wrong.
So at the Clan na Gael convention in Baltimore in 1874, John Devoy had to convince the organisation not only rescuing Australian Fenian prisoners was possible, but also to grant permission for the daring plan. I mean, the risk of this is immense. One informer, one careless whisper would doom the entire operation. In a passionate plea, John Devoy read Martin Hogan's desperate letter aloud and then roared to the gathering, "These men are our brothers!" A cry that would set the wheels of the Catalpa Rescue in motion.
The risk was taken, and the results showed that there was no traitor among those 61 delegates. The rank and file all knew about this. There were then 6,317 members in the 86 branches of the organisation, of whom 4,808 members were in good standing. A report of the proceedings, including a copy of Martin Hogan's letter and the resolution to undertake the rescue, was printed and sent to the 86 branches then existing. There could be no doubt that the great majority of these 4,808 members heard this report read. During the 12 months that followed, at the end of which membership had increased to 7,437 members, there were several circulars issued in which mention was made of the rescue project, and a printed copy of a letter from James Wilson, one of the prisoners, was sent round in order to allay doubts as to the possibility of success. There were fully 7,000 men in the United States aware of the work in hand. The proof that there was then no informer or spy in the organisation is made clear by the fact that the British government took absolutely no precaution against the rescue, and that the blow fell on them like a bolt from the blue.
All in favour, raise your hand.
Aye. I mean, the risk of this is immense. One informer, one careless whisper would doom the entire operation. Like, imagine if I said to you, we're going to rescue somebody in Australia, but none of you are going to say anything when you leave here, would you?
All in favour, raise your hands. Motion carries.
John Devoy was appointed chairman of the committee and chairman of Clan na Gael itself.
How do you fund an impossible rescue on the other side of the earth? Well, led by John Devoy, James Reynolds, who you see here, John W. Goff, John C. Talbot Jr. and Patrick Mahon, the committee launched an appeal for funds to finance the daring mission. To win over cautious Clan na Gael members, he organised public functions, lectures, entertainments, turning the cause into a movement no patriot could ignore. John Mitchell, who you may have heard of, helped raise funds because he'd escaped to sea a few years before that from Van Diemen's Land in Tasmania. and he was already seen as an icon amongst the Irish at that time, and he used his influence at the Ireland Revisited lecture in New York to rally support, donating his money to help fund the daring rescue of the Fenians still imprisoned in Australia. The rescue committee relied on former Fremantle prisoners, and these are some of them: Thomas McCarthy Fennell, Dennis Cashman, John Boyle O'Reilly, who's now bearded, and John Keneally, whose first-hand knowledge of the prison's routines, guard movements and patrols became invaluable. You see, these men had made it now to America, and they know how the prison works. Most crucially, O'Reilly's intimate understanding of the Bunbury coast would shape the daring Catalpa Rescue, turning experience into strategy.
John W. Goff was excellent at raising funds for this initiative. However, they only raised $7,000. It was suggested to John Devoy by John Boyle O'Reilly to seek advice from Captain Henry Hathaway of New Bedford. It was this Henry Hathaway who was instrumental in rescuing O'Reilly from his captivity in Western Australia. So John Devoy and Jim Reynolds went down to see Henry Hathaway and talked the matter over with him.
Henry Hathaway was captain of night police in New Bedford. He told me quietly to follow him. We went into the courthouse and locked the door. We sat down and talked the whole thing over. Hathaway entered warmly into the project. He recommended strongly the buying of a vessel and gave solid reasons why any other course would not be safe. He showed how it could be made to pay expenses. He had 18 years at sea, where he whaled all the time.
It was Captain Hathaway who was asked to be on the lookout for a suitable ship that might be for sale. And it was Captain Hathaway who recommended John T. Richardson, a whaling agent who had lived since boyhood in New Bedford. John T. Richardson was the father-in-law of one of the most vital men in the Catalpa Rescue, and that man was George S. Anthony.
Now, one man who doesn't get enough of a shout out is this incredible man here, James Reynolds. And he's the managing owner of the Catalpa. And James Reynolds was a County Cavan native who built his success in New Haven, Connecticut. He poured his wealth into the Catalpa Rescue, becoming the ship's managing owner and earning the nickname Catalpa Jim. With Captain George Anthony's father-in-law, John T. Richardson, providing the final financial backing, the vessel was secured, ready to embark on one of the boldest prison breaks in history. And this here is the Catalpa ship. Okay, and it's a 202-ton cargo ship, purchased and refitted as a functioning whaler ship, complete with a blubber deck, furnace, harpoons to mask its true purpose, with costs soaring so high that a dedicated Clonagale member mortgaged his house to keep the mission alive. John Devoy convinces George Anthony for the mission, which was an achievement in itself. George Anthony was recommended by John Boyle O'Reilly. He was a newly married Yankee Protestant with no Irish ties. Anthony was swayed by John Devoy's passionate plea for Irish freedom. He had a lot of whaling experience, though he'd never captained a whaling ship before.
Captain Anthony had pledged his life to the sea at the age of 15. He had been a successful whaleman. Captain Anthony had been married only a year, and there was a baby daughter who was a few months old. His mother was ill.
It was an ideal conspiracy, you see, the plans being made under the cover of darkness. Mr. Devoy was a brilliant talker, and he knew his subject well. He hurried over the story of the revolution in which the men were engaged, making prominent the fact that his friends who had been transported to Western Australia were not criminals. Then he sketched the plan of rescue. In his enthusiasm, it probably seemed the easy task to Devoy which he represented it to be. His friends would provide a whale ship fitted for sea. I was to sail as soon as possible, and beyond keeping up a pretense of whaling, my part would merely be to show his vessel off the coast of Australia on a certain date. There I would be hailed by a company of men in a boat. I would take them aboard and sail for home. The shore end of the escape would be managed by others. I asked for some time in which to consider the proposition, and I was given 1 day. Meanwhile, I was pledged never to speak of the plan, not even to Mrs. Anthony, whether or not I accepted the commission. I did some hard thinking that night, and the next evening, when I again met the committee at Richardson's, I told them I would go.
He later summed up his decision in 6 simple words, which was incredible what he said. He just said it was the right thing to do.
Captain George Smith Anthony was a devout New Bedford Quaker with no Irish blood and no ancestral tie to Ireland. He was not a nationalist. He was moved by his conscience. It was the call of the sea and the greater call of moral duty and adventure that stirred him back from retirement from the ocean.
Voyage begins. Captain George Anthony was tasked not only with rescuing the Fenian prisoners, but also with filling the Catalpa with whale oil to help recover the mission's steep costs. Because I mean, the money to even fund this ship, like how do you fund it? You have to bring back your costs. So they're going to pretend to be a whaling ship months at sea. With only 9 months to pull off the daring rescue, he set sail. He kept his crew completely unaware of the true purpose of the journey. This is the crew of the Catalpa when it departed. And if you look, and I don't know if you can see it, but like the complexion, an awful lot of them are seen as Malay or Malaysian, or they're from St. Helena.
I had made a wise choice in the selection of Samuel P. Smith of Edgartown as my first mate. The serious illness of my mother delayed my departure for 2 days. I said goodbye to my wife and baby at home. This was my first wedding anniversary. I thought of my wife, my child, and my sick mother, and I thought of the task I'd assumed to accomplish in the convict land of Australia. There was no officer with whom I could share the secret. The crew was purposely made up largely of Kanakas, Malays, and Africans, since they were likely to be less suspicious than other sailors and could better endure the climate of the southern seas.
From the blackened forge of the breaking sea, we were shaped by storm and memory. Salt in the blood and fire in the will. The tide may turn, we are standing still. Heave away, let the wild winds roar. We are bound for a distant shore. Strike the deck with a steady hand. No man yields and no hearts bend.
I discovered I was without a key to the chronometer. This was only the beginning of the trouble with the chronometer, which continued throughout the voyage.
Both John Devoy and Judge Goff see off the ship which left New Bedford 150 years ago. John Devoy and Judge Goff had to set about checking the bills and expenditure of the project.
The cost of fitting out the Catalpa ship climbed past over $18,000, adding pressure to an already delicate mission. Tensions flared when John W. Goff insisted that his Clan na Gael man Thomas Brennan sail. But Captain Anthony had initially refused, allowing only one trusted man aboard with a legitimate shipboard role to avoid suspicion. Jim Reynolds and John Devoy backed Dennis Duggan, a carpenter and veteran of the 1867 Rising.
And Dennis Duggan is one of the few Irish that's actually on that ship, and his relation is here, by the way.
Dennis Duggan was selected by Clan na Gael to accompany the ship. He was to be a carpenter on board.
Devoy, another person that I really admire in Irish history who gets completely overlooked, is this guy here, John Breslin. So what kind of man can outwit an empire twice? This guy. John Breslin is the cool hand Luke of Irish history. He had already masterminded the 1865 escape of Fenian leader James Stephens from Richmond prison. Now with his intimate knowledge of the British prison system, he's the perfect man to orchestrate one of the most daring rescues the world had ever seen.
I had instructions to proceed to Western Australia and attempt the rescue of the Irish political prisoners, and to use my own judgment as to the means and manner of the rescue, and to expect the arrival and cooperation of the Catalpa in January. Before leaving New York, John Devoy had informed me the Western men had referred a request to the committee that they might be allowed to send a man to assist.
And nearly half of the money for the Catalpa was raised by Clan na Gael in California, giving them significant influence over the mission. As a result, they insisted that their chosen man, Tom Desmond, accompany John Breslin to Australia, ensuring their stake in the daring plan.
I told Mr. Devoy that unless I approved of the man they had selected, I would decline to accept his services. We agreed that I should be at liberty to do so. I did like Thomas Desmond, and I now believe that if Desmond alone had been sent, the rescue would have been as successfully accomplished and at far less cost to the organisation.
Now, just to be clear, the Catalpa ship's going already, okay? So this is the other ship that's going, okay? With John Breslin and Thomas Desmond. So the Fenians in America assembled their own sort of like an Ocean's 11 team. And they sent John Breslin and former San Francisco Sheriff Deputy Tom Desmond as the advance men. On September 13th, 1875, they set sail from San Francisco above a ship called the Cyphranes. Upon arriving in Sydney, you can't make this up. Upon arriving in Sydney, John Breslin and Tom Desmond learned from former Fremantle prisoner John Edward Kenny that another rescue attempt was happening for the Catalpa 6.
Irish revolutionaries in Australia gathered funds and trusted allies, including John Edward Kelly, who had once been condemned to be hanged, drawn and quartered for the rebellion of 1867. Acting with utmost secrecy, Fenian John King took work as a labourer in a quarry near the prison, masking his true mission beneath the routine of hard labour. For the rescue to succeed, every movement, every whisper, every conspirator had to remain hidden, because the entire enterprise depended on absolute secrecy.
Say, jeez, there's two, right? So that's an unexpected complication that could jeopardise the carefully laid plans. So again, you have to bring them all together under one roof and not let the British know. So in November 1875, John Breslin settles into the Fremantle's Emerald Isle Hotel. That's actually it there, that picture there. That's the Emerald Isle Hotel, okay? And he adopts the pseudonym James Collins, okay? He pretends to be a wealthy prospector. He's not, but he's pretending to be, okay? While Thomas Desmond hides in plain sight as a carriage factory worker, secretly recruiting 5 Irish men to cut the telegraph lines on the day of the planned prison escape. Now, John Breslin deliberately leaves some legal documents to be found.
I believe my West Australian reputation as a millionaire is due chiefly to the fact that this document was left with intent to deceive loosely in my room so that it might be read my style and actual cost of living being in reality below that of an ordinary commercial traveller.
Around the floor. So gossiping maids will go, oh look, he's got a lot of money, okay? Armed with legal documents claiming vast mining interests, John Breslin deliberately left them in plain sight in his Fremantle hotel room. He knew that the maids would spread the story of a wealthy prospector, cementing his cover and keeping suspicion at bay. Also, John Breslin was having an affair while staying at the Emerald Isle Hotel in Fremantle. He had an affair with 22-year-old chambermaid Mary Tundut, who later became pregnant. She gave birth on December 1876 to Breslin's only child, though Breslin will never see her again after the escape. Breslin is an excellent con man. He is disguised as a wealthy investor. John Breslin uses his wit to gain trust, securing the help of an Irish ex-prisoner who had access to the jail and could secretly deliver messages. Destroy this for old Aaron, the door of the tomb is ajar, he told the Fenians in a secret letter given to them. Meantime, Captain Anthony and the other ship, the Catalpa, is still months away from Australia's shores.
Like a hammer falls, echoes long through the ocean wall.
As the Catalpa sailed south, Captain Anthony's crew still believed they're on a routine whaling voyage. Like the only people in his crew at the time who know is Dennis Duggan and Captain George Anthony. Okay? But there's no whales. Okay? There's mounting costs. There's crew injuries making the deception harder to maintain. What's Captain Anthony going to do? Because he needs to recoup these costs. Should he stay at sea to recoup expenses? Or go straight to Fremantle?
Arriving at Flores, I learned through the fault of my chronometer that I was 120 miles outside my reckoning. It was suggested to me that I should catch up on a deckload of albacores, which abounded, where I could trade them off. The crew caught 1/2 fish. I landed my small boat at Flores and was at once placed under arrest by the custom house authorities for smuggling. The fish, it seems, could not be landed without paying a duty. I was also informed they were worthless. After ordering a native to take them back to the ship, the island officials released me from arrest. I had 210 barrels of sperm whale oil aboard. For several days, my crew was employed in breaking out the cargo and shipping it back to America.
So Anthony also has an angry crew, because the crew are there for money. The crew are there to make money. They don't know that they're on this big rescue. Okay, and 1/3 of his crew abandoned him in the Azores.
I sent a runner to furnish new men, but it was necessary for them to be smuggled aboard the ship, since they had no passports. They were to be picked up by the Catalpa's whale boats in order to reach the vessel. I bought a new chronometer. I had been informed by Dennis Duggan that Thomas Brennan was planning to join the Catalpa at Fayal. I told Duggan, I think we have all the crew we need at present. Mr. Brennan may get left. As the Catalpa left the Canary Islands, the steamer ship Brennan was arriving on could be seen in the distance. I grinned as Thomas Brennan was too late.
As well as dealing with a defective chronometer, Captain Anthony sets course for Tenerife in the Canary Islands, knowing he can no longer hide the truth from his first mate, Samuel Smith. With a long and grueling journey ahead, around the Cape of Good Hope and across the Indian Ocean, Samuel Smith had to be brought into the secret. If he refused to take part in the daring rescue, Anthony had no choice but to leave him behind in Tenerife. The mission's secrecy hangs on one man, Samuel Smith's decision. And after hearing the truth, Samuel Smith had a choice: walk away in Tenerife or stand beside Captain Anthony in one of the boldest rescues in history. He says, Captain Anthony, I'll stick by you in this ship if she goes to hell and burns off the bowsprit. On 15th of March, the Catalpa spots St. Paul Island. After months of monotonous travel and a few scares along the way, the ship had been delayed significantly by bad weather.
Heave away through the dark and foam. Every wave is a step toward home. Steal our breath and brace our feet. We are not the ones defeat can be.
And John Devoy back in America is under increasing pressure. In late March, John Devoy receives frantic letters from Clan na Gael in Australia, demanding news of the Catalpa. Where's the ship? It's supposed to be here. It hasn't arrived. But under immense pressure, John Devoy remains steady. He knows that one rash move can unravel this entire mission. Eventually, the Catalpa arrives in Bunbury on the 26th of March 1876, 100 kilometres south of Fremantle Prison, where the Catalpa 6 are. The boat has now arrived. I'm going to take you back 2 months to John Breslin. So what's John Breslin doing in those 2 to 3 months while he's waiting for the Catalpa to arrive? So, John Breslin had met William Foley. Okay, William Foley, an ex-Fenian who had access to the prison. He was released on a ticket of leave due to poor health. Now they weren't quite as harsh as they were a few years before. Okay, Foley became the vital link between John Breslin and James Wilson, the voice in the tomb. Smuggling in the electrifying news, a rescue plan was unfolding. Now all the prisoners had been sent in from the various gangs in the bush and now lodged in Fremantle Prison. So now is the perfect time to rescue them.
All the prisoners I wanted were working outside the prison, and communication with them was comparatively easy.
All the prisoners are engaged in building a reservoir to supply water to shipping in the harbour, but the boat still hasn't arrived. The Catalpa's still not here. James Wilson is training a horse for the prison doctor. The employment gave him a chance at going out of the prison several times a day. He was able to keep in touch more easily with William Foley and John Breslin.
By the 1st of January, I had several interviews with James Wilson and determined the plan for escape.
John Breslin moves in high society. John Breslin carefully studies Fremantle Prison's layout. Remember, he's the millionaire. Oh yes, tell me more, okay? So, he routines while revealing as little as possible about himself. Posing as a wealthy American investor, he charms the town's residents with his good manners and engaging personality. He makes himself popular, he makes himself respected. His supposed fortune grants him access to Fremantle's high society, allowing him to move freely and gather intelligence without suspicion. He is so successful at this, he gets a prison tour of a Fremantle jail where he's planning to break out the prisoners. And he's pretending to be this millionaire. Eager to impress a wealthy American investor, Fremantle authorities unknowingly granted John Breslin a full tour of the prison he aimed to infiltrate. He was exposed to every critical detail, from corridors to punishment cells. Though he kept his composure, Breslin saw firsthand escape from within is impossible. This prison is a fortress. His only chance lay in striking when the prisoners were outside the walls. And he is wondering himself, because the boat hasn't arrived yet. Is it too late? As weeks turn to months, no sign of the Catalpa, John Breslin's prolonged stay in Fremantle raises suspicion. Remember, he's pretending to be this wealthy investor, but he doesn't have much money. Okay? This forces him to travel between towns to maintain his cover, while the constant relocation of prisoners make communication fragile, because they're constantly getting moved around. And the escape plan now is increasingly uncertain. With no word of the Catalpa, John Breslin relocated to Bunbury under the guise of exploration, while in Fremantle, a Fenian called John King, posed as a gold miner named Jones, arrives with £384 from Clan na Gael in New Zealand, quietly preparing for the escape.
On the 5th of March, John King arrived by the Georgette steamship, bringing me £384 from New Zealand. He was anxious to remain until the escape party was effected, that he stayed in Fremantle and ultimately became one of the rescuing party.
Suspicion is growing. John Breslin masks his true purpose by feigning interest. He pretends he's interested in gold. He pretends he's interested in wool. He pretends he's interested in timber. But beneath his composed exterior, doubt is gnawing at him. Like, what happened to the boat? You know? Did it sink even? He doesn't know. Especially as a separate, uncoordinated rescue mission from Ireland threatened to derail Plantagale's carefully laid plans. Because, I kid you not, there was a third planned escape. Local Fremantle authorities arrogantly dismissed a warning by British intelligence about another 2 newly arrived Irishmen that no one could escape Fremantle prison. But Breslin decides, I'm going to put these 2 men to good use. I have to take everybody in, so we're all working together. This plan that I have, John Breslin, is too elaborate. You must all follow me. And that pressure on him is immense. He still doesn't know the ship's going to arrive. The Catalpa eventually does arrive. Okay? After nearly 12 months at sea, it's meant to be 9 months, Captain George Anthony finally reached the rendezvous on March 29, 1876. 3 months late, no clear contact, and knowing failure was not an option, keeping most of his crew on board to prevent desertion. He stepped into the small port, fully aware that the crisis at hand would be the true test of my courage.
On March the 29th at 6:30 p.m, I found by the bulletin board that the Catalpa had pulled into Bunbury the day before.
At the head of the jetty, a boy approached and asked if I was Captain Anthony. The lad handed me a telegram. There were friends in the area.
Now John Breslin and George Anthony eventually meet. With the Catalpa finally in position, John Breslin met Captain Anthony in Bunbury to finalise the escape.
I met Captain Anthony ashore and explained to him what I proposed with the ship. He expressed himself perfectly willing to do what I required of him.
I brought Mr. Breslin aboard the Catalpa and introduced him to Samuel Smith.
But his crew were in a very discontented state, and attempting to desert the ship, 4 of them took a boat forcibly and made off for the bush. They were brought back in irons.
Anthony would sail for Rockingham, while Breslin alerted the prisoners at Fremantle Jetty.
I intended the Catalpa should stand well out to sea, 10 or 12 miles outside Garden Island, and a whaleboat into Rockingham, and pull out to the ship, when we would get on board, a distance of 16 miles, which could easily be done in 4 or 5 hours.
As we walked up the jetty, to our surprise, we saw Thomas Brennan coming towards us. Neither myself or Breslin were overjoyed to meet Brennan. We already had all the assistance we needed. I was later brought to the Emerald Isle Hotel and introduced to John King and Thomas Desmond.
I arranged with Captain Anthony to come up with me to Fremantle by the Georgette steamship, which was delivering the colonial mails. The rescue was going to be on the morning of Thursday, April 6th. From the bridge of the Georgette captain, Anthony had a good view of the coast outside Rockingham and noted the positions of Rottnest, Garden Island, and other principal landmarks. Arriving in Fremantle was the Britannic Majesty's gunboat called Convict, carrying 2 guns and 30 men. This upset my plan for Thursday morning. I asked Captain Anthony to overhaul his vessel and paint her.
I stuck up an old piece of joist in the sand above high water mark. I told Breslin, this is the place I will meet you with my boat if God spares my life.
This was a good time to do it as well, because with Royal Navy ships and customs officers disrupting the original escape plan, the plan was pushed to April 17th, which is timed perfectly because the convict establishment would be busy because they had the Perth Yacht Club regatta was happening at the time. So basically all the police would be distracted. Now, when you're telling a story, and if it was a movie, I'd be lovely to say, and then they all got away, but they actually didn't, okay? So I should tell you about that. James Keeley, that you see here, once an intended escapee, was deliberately excluded from the Catalpa Rescue because he attempted to betray his comrades for a reduced sentence. Thomas Delaney, he was confined at the time, and that made his escape impossible, leaving only 6 Fenians to seize their chance at freedom. James Wilson was labouring at the jetty. John Breslin passes by because he's pretending to just look at what's going on, and quietly utters the words as he goes past James Wilson, Monday morning. A message that sent the prisoners into silent readiness, knowing that if they weren't outside when the plan unfolded, they'd be left forever. Sunday night of Easter weekend 1876, Breslin's message to the prisoners echoes in the prisoners' mind. We have money, arms, and clothes. Let no man's heart fail him, for this chance may never come again. Captain Anthony rows ashore the night before. Now, there was a sense that anything could go wrong at any time, and it does actually, but Captain Anthony remarks, I can only trust Samuel Smith on board the Catalpa and the men in my own whaleboat. Anthony knew exactly where to land, as himself and Breslin had driven stakes in the sand to mark the spot for escaping. Keeping watch at sea is Samuel Smith. Now what you must understand, and if you look at that map, okay, so the British would have like owned Australia, and they would have seen like 3 miles within Australia as British waters, and outside of that was international waters, okay. Against John Devoy's original orders, Captain Anthony had left the Catalpa in the hands of Samuel Smith, keeping it beyond the 3-mile limit so he doesn't go into British waters. Captain Anthony's fate is now tied to the mission. He refuses to remain on the sidelines. He's fully aware that he's gambling his life, his family, and by the way, Captain Anthony is just married with a child, okay? And he's on board this for 12 months, the ship, risking his life for men he doesn't know, who's a Protestant, who knows nothing about Irish history, simply the right thing to do. And his career on what would come next. So according to Captain Anthony, we hauled up on the beach and I told the men to lie down and go to sleep. I walked the beach the whole night longing for the day. And if you think things are exciting, it's going to go nuts now, right? Now we are going to escape from the tomb.
Part 4. The escape from the tomb.
At 5:30 a.m. on Easter Monday, John Breslin, Tom Desmond and their team set off towards Rockingham Road, armed with hats, coats and weapons for the escaping prisoners. Speed and secrecy are everything. One mistake, one wrong move, and the entire mission could unravel before their very eyes.
Robert Cranston walked out as if going to deliver a message. He overtook the working party and told the warden he had been sent to take James Wilson and Michael Harrington to move some furniture in the governor's house, which was the nearest point to the meeting place. He exhibited a key, and the warden directed the 2 men to go with Cranston. Thomas Darragh and Thomas Hassett started as if for work in the same direction, and Martin Hogan made an excuse to the warden to leave his work for a moment and joined them.
Martin Hogan was painting the superintendent's house, and interestingly, there's an account he actually paints the window like a symbol, that he would now be seen but they would not, and he said, now I am the light. The escape begins as Breslin watches the Fenian prisoners march towards him, stepping out of Fremantle and into the daring escape. They had shovels. To see Breslin, they throw their shovels into the ditch and they run for their lives. Where waiting horse traps and guns were there to aid their final break from captivity. With no time to waste, they leapt aboard, knowing they were now running for their lives.
John King had lingered in Fremantle to make sure the coast was clear, then rowed to catch up with the group and confirm that all remained quiet.
An intense 90-minute sprint by horse to Rockingham, where their fate hung in the balance. Remember, this is real, this actually happened. At the beach, the plan is beginning to unravel.
Meantime, all is calm at the beach because Captain Anthony's men are having breakfast. Captain Anthony is the only person who knows a prison escape is about to happen.
A Rockingham local called James Bell had noticed the whaleboat and was suspicious about what they were doing there. He'd informed them that the SS Georgette, which is a steamship, was on patrol in the area. Now remember, a steamship can go far quicker than a sail ship. Not only that, the suspicious James Bell hung around and now witnesses the arrival of armed Fenians at Rockingham Beach. George Anthony tries to reassure him that he was not to be robbed. Bell spotted convict caps in the traps. This single witness, this James Bell, was threatening the perfect prison rescue. A gun was pulled on the local. They were going to finish him off. Okay, but Captain Anthony would not allow him to be shot, and it's a good job he didn't allow him to be shot. He said none of that will happen around here. But James Bell escapes. He seizes the moment. He leaps onto Fenian John King's abandoned horse and bolts towards Fremantle, carrying the alarm that would unleash the authorities in pursuit. Until then, the police were completely unaware of the escape, but now the hunt's going to be on. Every second from now on is going to count. From now on, it's a race against time. An hour into the escape, the alarm is raised at the prison. Where had the prisoners escaped to? Bell told them that they had escaped in a whaleboat.
Yes, sir. Moving out. Everyone to the exit. Double time.
The Fenians had launched the whaleboat. Okay, so a whaleboat's like a rowing boat, okay? But the police patrols were now in hot pursuit, and dispatches are now flying all over Fremantle. The chase is on. In front of them is freedom. Behind them was danger. Breslin reckoned it would take 4 to 5 hours of hard rowing to reach the Catalpa. When the whaleboat was 2 miles offshore, they saw the police on the beach at the spot on which they had embarked. The race, though, was not over yet, and now the enemy knows exactly where they are. Okay, so it's about to get really, really serious. Now the authorities know where they are. The element of surprise is now gone. The British sent after them in 2 boats. The first was a Coast Guard cutter. The second, however, and you must understand the times that were then, was a steamship. Okay, so a steamship is far more powerful than a sail ship. Okay, powered by coal. Okay, the Australian governor commanded the fastest ship in Fremantle, the SS Georgette, a passenger steamer designed to bring the fugitives in. Now, John Breslin, a decade after masterminding James Stevens' escape from Richmond Prison, John Breslin is now orchestrating an even bolder feat, liberating 6 Fenians from Fremantle's grip. But before vanishing into the storm, he left one final act of defiance. He leaves a letter to the British governor, mocking the rule by declaring, "I have released from the clemency of Her Most Gracious Majesty 6 Irishmen condemned for the unforgivable crime of love of country and hatred of tyranny." What a show, man. After 7 brutal hours of rowing, the 16 exhausted men finally spotted the Catalpa on the horizon, their lifeline to escape. But as hope surges, a storm begins. Thunder is roaring, lightning is splitting the sky, monstrous waves pound the waiting Catalpa ship, as if the very sea itself is conspiring to do what the British would not do. Captain George Anthony knows that the whaleboat was dangerously overloaded. The storm is relentless. Their chances of survival is dwindling. He kept his fears buried, shouting encouragement to keep the men rowing. With the Catalpa still distant, and the mast snapped, so the mast is now snapped on our little whaleboat. Turning back means certain capture. Pressing forward meant a sliver of hope.
Row men! Row for your life! Retry it! Another way! Pitch yourself! Follow! Hold on!
He kept his fears buried.
shouting encouragement to keep the men rowing. Pressing forward meant a sliver of hope. But privately, George Anthony isn't sure if they're even going to make the night alive. The storm is that bad. As towering waves crashed over the whaleboat, the desperate crew bailed water with anything they could. They used food tins, they used buckets, they used their bare hands, just keep the water out of the boat.
Oh, won't take me! Pull harder, keep her steady. She's taking on water. Bill, fast, hold the rod. Keep the rhythm! Lay it out, faster! He's rising!
While battling to reclaim a broken mast and soaked sail before the sea swallowed them whole. They're exhausted. They're drenched, they're freezing. They knew one thing: if they couldn't keep the boat afloat, all hope of escape would be lost. And I think an incredible thing happens here, an incredible idea happens here. They get one of the oars and they use it as a makeshift mast.
Right! I'm steady!
Put it on, right? The mast is broken, the waves are threatening to sink them. The sailor improvises, he plants an oar upright to serve as a makeshift mast, securing a small jib sail to it. They harnessed whatever wind they could. They coaxed the battered boat forward despite the raging sea.
In the old country, rise again.
The Catalpa spots the boat. At dawn, Samuel Smith spies that little battered whaleboat from the Catalpa. The rowboat with Breslin, Captain Anthony and the Catalpa 6 is now on its way, but it's being followed.
Row harder, men! Pull together! She's holding steady. Keep the rhythm. Secure the lines, men. The wind is shifting fast. Pull together, Auntie!
Bearing down with ferocious speed is the SS Georgette steamship.
Soldiers, attention. The mission demands unwavering discipline. Yes, sir! Steady, men. Eyes on the horizon. Yes, sir. Prepare to come about.
The hunter is now cruising in on the hunted. The Georgette is surging forward under full steam. Major Charles Finnerty, who you see there, was determined to crush the escape, because what a humiliation for them that this happened under their watch. Captain Anthony knows the brutal truth. If the SS Georgette reaches the Catalpa first, the dream of freedom is over. It is done. And imagine what's going to happen to them as well if they get arrested. The prisoners, they put down their sail and they lay down in the tiny rowboat. Let's pretend we're not even in the boat. The Georgette steams past half a mile from the small rowboat. Miraculously, it doesn't see them. Anthony thought she must have mistaken the whaleboat for a piece of floating timber. How lucky they were. But the Georgette actually reaches the Catalpa. The SS Georgette pulls alongside the Catalpa. Armed police demand to board and search the vessel. They're convinced they have the fugitives trapped. But First Mate Samuel Smith stood firm. He refuses the request.
that the Catalpa had already crossed beyond Britain's territorial 3-mile limit. You're in international waters. Back off, right? But James Wilson in the little whale ship, the voice in the tomb, he thinks he's done. The most awful time, this guy, the voice in the tomb, he's thinking suicide. James Wilson, the voice in the tomb, had endured years of torment. If rescue failed, they could not allow themselves to be taken alive. But the Georgette, the SS Georgette steamship, runs out of fuel. The Georgette ran out of fuel and was forced to return to Fremantle as they had been searching for the prisoners since early morning. They were running out of coal. But the British Coast Guard, the other boat, is closing in, fast. Just as the Catalpa seemed in the clear, Captain Anthony's heart pounds.
Look there, horizon.
It's closing in fast. If it reaches them, every sacrifice would be in vain. This is the moment of truth. One more push. The Coast Guard cutter is closing in. The noose is tightening. The exhausted Fenians, they're drained, they're broken, but they're not yet beaten. They have one final chance to claim their freedom. Every aching muscle, every blistered hand, every ounce of will left in their bodies had to be poured into these last strokes. Stroke, stroke, row, you bastards! Row, row! This is it! The last fight of their lives. Failure is not an option. Samuel Smith expertly maneuvers the Catalpa. He moves the Catalpa in between the British Coast Guard cutter and the whaleboat. He cuts off the British cutter just in time. And they made it. He allows the exhausted men to scramble aboard, only 400 yards from their pursuers. They were so close. As the furious crew of the cutter shouts in vain, the Catalpa turns towards the open sea. For the first time in a decade, the rescued Fenians knew the truth. They're free. The showman decides, I'm going to blow a kiss at the British, okay? As the water police cutter sat powerless in the waves, John Breslin blew a mocking kiss to the men who just lost their quarry. And only now did the British realise, hang on, that's that wealthy prospector that we knew. Why is he look? He's with the Fenians. He's in on it. The so-called millionaire had outwitted the British crown, not once, but twice, leaving even the cutter's captain to nod in reluctant admiration before turning back to shore. It all looks good. It all looks great. This looks like a great story, but no. Captain Anthony steers the Catalpa away from the coast. Yet they still are not completely safe. During the night, the wind, it dies down now. Remember, it's a sailing ship, okay? They need the wind. The Catalpa is now becalmed. It's not moving. Oh my God, talk about timing, right? The SS Georgette, in the meantime, is now making its way back. Just before dawn, on April the 19th, the SS Georgette, and by the way, now they have a big gun, okay? There is now refueled and armed. They storm back into the chase. Its coal-powered engines are easily closing in on the Catalpa. John Breslin says we may have to fight. As the Georgette looms over the Catalpa like a predator, John Breslin laid out the stark reality. Do you want to die now as free men, or die in prison? The answer was instant. Do whatever you say. And with that, Breslin made his stand. He gripped his revolver as the Fenians gathered in the cabin. They're going to be ready to fight to the last breath. Armed with nothing but whaling harpoons and Yankee defiance, the Catalpa's crew stands ready to see the British Navy not as an unstoppable force, but as a bully. And they've had enough of a bully. As a bully is trying to impose its will where it no longer belonged. With a deck full of armed guards, the British Georgette fires a warning shot from its newly mounted 12-pounder cannon. The British fire a warning shot at the Catalpa.
Hey!
Thunderous reminder that the British were prepared to use deadly force. The cannon goes directly over the Catalpa's bow. As the waves crashed around them from the cannon, the Georgette militia commander made his intentions clear. He's going to stop at nothing, even bloodshed, to drag these escaped Fenians back to their prison tomb. Samuel Smith on board the Catalpa is furious that his American flag had been fired on. He shouts, "Damn him! Let him sink us! We'll go down with the ship." Captain Anthony turns to John Breslin and asks him for advice. What should I do? Should we just give up now? We came so close. And without hesitation, and this is why I admire John Breslin so much, calm under fire, John Breslin says, "Hold on. Don't take any notice of the shot. Don't react.
Hold on."
With those words, the Catalpa held its course. So in other words, you're making the British now play second hand, right? Make your next move. You fired your shot. What are you going to do? As the Catalpa and the Georgette faced off, the British reload their cannon, demanding the return of 6 convicts they could see standing on deck. But Captain Anthony, now steady under pressure, gave nothing away.
"There are no convicts here that I know of,"
he replied as the Georgette's officers blustered about British law. They even shouted across from their ship that they telegrammed the American government and they now have the might of both the British and American Empire behind them. The standoff is no longer about firepower, it's a battle of sheer will.
Captain Anthony was given 15 minutes to make his decision to give up the prisoners.
And if we encounter resistance, sir, we engage.
But John Breslin thinks that they're bluffing. Why Breslin is so cool about the whole thing is Breslin had arranged for 2 Fenians to cut telegraph lines across the south coast of Western Australia. So he's literally 10 steps ahead of the British. This was so it wouldn't alert nearby British warships. But what could Captain Anthony do? With the Georgette's cannon primed and British threats closing in. Do I surrender the men that I'd risked everything for? Do I stand ground against the might of an empire? His wife is waiting here in New Bedford with their child, his exhausted crew being pushed to the brink. 6 Fenians had already stared death in the face too many times. Captain George Anthony does something remarkable. He plays his ace card and with unshakable defiance, he raises your American flag. And Captain Anthony, with the cannon aimed at his ship and the weight of 6 lives on his shoulders, makes his final stand. This ship is sailing under the American flag. She's on the high seas. If you fire on her, you fire on the American flag. He dared the British to risk an international crisis. See, Britain had already been reeling from it lost to America over a similar dispute from the American Civil War. Anthony gambled that they wouldn't risk another costly diplomatic war, and in that moment the balance of power shifts.
So it was this flag that if you fire on this flag, you fire on the American flag. So this is what Captain Anthony would have raised the American flag. It's this exact one. That if you fire on this ship, you fire on the American flag. So it's basically a declaration of war.
The Catalpa is virtually defenceless. There's no cannons, there's no artillery, but what do they have? They've got grit and they've got your American flag. But what he didn't realise is that Georgette is bluffing too. They're nudging them back into British waters. They don't realise this though, right? If they can get them back into British waters, they can go, well, screw your American flag, we're taking them back, okay? So, with the wind suddenly dying, the Catalpa is stranded. It's unable to move forward, it's unable to escape. Freedom is slipping away, everything is lost, no wind. Then what happens? The wind rose. The wind rose like a blessing. It filled the Catalpa's sails and sends the American flag billowing defiantly against the sky. Captain Anthony seizes the moment. He swings the ship forward towards the Georgette, holding his course until the last possible second. So he's like, screw this, I'm aiming for you there, right?
What in God's name is that ship doing? Sir, it's coming right down, sir!
And then he swerves at the last moment into international waters. The Catalpa is heading home. With their bluff called and their power slipping away, the Georgette is desperate now. They're screaming at the Catalpa to surrender, only to be met with silence. Ever ignoring me now. When they attempted to claim they could see Fenians on deck, Captain Anthony goes, "No, you're mistaken." In a final act of defiance, the British request permission to board, but Anthony, knowing his victory was sealed, simply replies, "No, sir. I am bound for sea and cannot stop."
Sir, I am bound for sea and cannot stop!
As the Georgette faded into the distance, Anthony turned to his crew, laughing in triumph. I'm damn sure we won't be seeing the Georgette again.
Aye, a hard-won victory.
There was crew discontentment during the voyage back to America. The crew had now experienced crowded conditions and the knowledge that they had participated in an act that could have led to severe consequences. The Catalpa 6 wanted to get to America as quickly as possible. Captain Anthony had been promised to recoup expenses through whaling, and John Breslin was on Captain Anthony's side regarding this. The Catalpa did her best to avoid the Royal Navy on her way back to America. James Wilson stated, "The horrible thought of being recaptured and carried back to a life worse than my past prison life made me almost crazy." There would be no port stops until the ship reached home. No fresh food would be obtained on the voyage. Also, the addition of John King and Thomas Brennan further strained supplies. Thomas Brennan and Dennis Duggan would undermine John Breslin's authority. They wanted back to America as soon as possible. news of the escape had arrived in June, and this was released to the press. News of the Catalpa escape reached America in June 1876, 100 years after the American Republic was established.
4 months later, thousands lined Broadway, cheering as the rescued Fenians were paraded through New York. Their triumphant return dominating headlines worldwide and delivering a humiliating blow to the British Empire. Like, this went around the world, okay, so it was humiliation for the British Empire. It was proof that even its mighty grip could be outwitted. But it must be remembered that the Catalpa Six had suffered from British prison brutality. I mean, it was horrific what some of these guys suffered, okay? And they weren't right when they returned home from the journey. John Devoy himself is shaken by the sight of these crack British troops that he knew a few years beforehand. I'd known them as soldiers full of enthusiasm and spirit, and I was not prepared for the change which 10 years of iron discipline of the British prison had wrought in them. Though they had escaped Fremantle, the scars, the mental scars, the emotional scars, the physical scars, the D on their chest, would never fully heal. And the Fremantle Six remained in the United States for the rest of their lives. I also have a receipt here of the suits for the Catalpa Six for when they were brought to New Bedford. This is the receipt given to me by some Irish historians, and it stands as a tangible link to the legendary Catalpa itself. It documents the official reception of the Fremantle prisoner. So, a moment when 6 men once condemned would finally be welcomed as free men. Now, John Boyle O'Reilly was the speaker, okay? And where does he speak? He speaks in Liberty Hall in New Bedford. That's why I wanted to see where Liberty Hall was, okay, earlier today. John Boyle O'Reilly's voice thunders through the packed crowd as he declares the Catalpa Rescue an act of divine justice. He proclaims, "When England said that this rescue was illegal, we have acted from a higher law than your written constitution and your treaties. The law of God and humanity." He was praising Captain Anthony's defiance. He reminded his fellow Irishmen of their debt to America, warning the Irishman who could forget what the Stars and Stripes have done for his countrymen deserved that in his time of need that flag will forget him. That night, as Liberty Hall shook with applause, the Catalpa Rescue was no longer just a daring escape, it had become legend.
British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli pursued a firm, uncompromising Fenian policy of refusing clemency or general amnesty for the remaining military Fenian prisoners, repeatedly dismissing parliamentary calls for their release in a cavalier manner and insisting the government would decide any releases on its own terms to uphold imperial authority and deter Irish republicanism. Propaganda-wise, this was a big mistake for Britain.
And not only that, in Dublin, the Catalpa Rescue electrified a demoralised Irish resistance with torchlit processions flooding the streets of Dublin in celebration.
Two effigies of Prime Minister Disraeli and the Duke of Cambridge were burned by the 500 torchbearers.
Epilogue. The Silence of the Tombs.
While a humiliated Britain raged at this, condemning the escape, they accused the US of aiding Irish terrorism.
In an ironic twist of fate, Australian police in Perth sent an urgent letter to New Bedford, America, describing the 6 escaped prisoners. This letter landed on the Chief of Police's desk, who happened to be Henry Hathaway, the very man who had helped to source the boat, the Catalpa, and who had rescued John Boyle O'Reilly, was now reading this letter. It is said that he framed that letter on his wall like a prize. He died at age 89, probably still enjoying the irony, and now rests in Oak Grove Cemetery in New Bedford. James Catalpa Jim Reynolds of New Haven had mortgaged his home and had become the managing owner of the Catalpa ship. He died in 1897 at his New Haven home and rests beneath a monument in St. Lawrence Cemetery, which was erected in 1904 to him. He lived to see the audacious rescue succeed, the British Empire humiliated, and his nickname forever associated with the daring prison escape. Big Jim, James Maguire, who assisted John Boyle O'Reilly in his escape, died on his farm in January 1915 at 81. He now rests beneath the simple stones of Dardanup Pioneer Catholic Cemetery in Western Australia. He asked for no reward and claimed no glory. Father Patrick Dan McCabe whispered absolution and coded messages to chained Fenians in Australia. He was instrumental to the escape of John Boyle O'Reilly. He outfoxed the British Empire with his rosary beads and quiet nerve. When the truth had leaked out later on, Father McCabe was obliged to make a hasty departure from Australia. He came to America and remained in Minnesota, tending to fellow Irish exiles. He died in 1899 at St. Mary's Mission, near Waseca, and rests beneath a Celtic cross in St. Mary's Cemetery. The Fenian Memorial Committee of America laid a commemorative plaque at his grave in 2019. This here is a statue of John Boyle O'Reilly, the famous Fenian who escaped Australia. John Boyle O'Reilly championed Irish freedom, workers' rights, and black emancipation. He died at just 46 in Hull, Massachusetts, on a summer's day in 1890, and rests beneath the stones of Hollywood Cemetery in Brookline. He had been suffering from bouts of insomnia during this time, and on the evening of his death he took a long walk with his brother-in-law, hoping that physical fatigue would induce the needed sleep. Later on that night he took some of his wife's sleeping medicine, which contained chloral hydrate. On the morning of 10th of August, around 2 to 3 a.m, his wife woke up and found O'Reilly sitting in a chair with one hand resting on the table near a book and a cigar in the other. He was the poet rebel who outran the British Empire. Poet Walt Whitman has said of John Boyle O'Reilly, "I shall never forget the first time he spoke to me about his prison life. He was all alive with the most vivid indignation. He was a great storm out somewhere, a great sea pushing up against the shore." And it says here, poetry and patriotism gave of their laurel and oak, from which Erin weaves a wreath for her heroes. John O'Mahony, co-founder of the Fenian Brotherhood, dedicated the last years of his life to literary pursuits. He had suffered from ill health and struggled to secure the bare means for subsistence. When his poverty was discovered, he declined to receive assistance. He died in New York City in 1877, and his remains were taken to Ireland and interred with the honours of a public funeral. What he did achieve was he helped to light the spark that would not easily die. Ticket of leave Fenian, William Foley, who had slipped coded messages to the prisoners in Australia, died in November 1876. His heart had been wrecked by the prison that couldn't break his nerve, and he now rests in Cavalry Cemetery, Queens. Fenian Michael Cody had quietly raised thousands in gold and coin for the Catalpa Rescue. He died on the 13th of July 1922 at 78 in Queensland. He is buried in Waverley Cemetery in an unmarked grave in Bronte, Sydney, New South Wales. Fenian John Edward Kelly linked exiled Fenians from Australia to America. He helped fan the flames for the Catalpa Six's daring escape. He died far too young at 44 in 1884, consumed by tuberculosis in Boston. He now rests beneath a proud monument in Mount Hope Cemetery, Mattapan, Boston. Dennis Cashman, who had been on board the Hougoumont with John Boyle O'Reilly, and later was involved in America in the initial stages of planning the Catalpa Rescue, died from heart disease in his Boston home on the 8th of January 1897. He rests in Hollywood Cemetery, Brookline, near where John Boyle O'Reilly is buried. A new Celtic memorial headstone was erected by the National Graves Association of Ireland in 2025, with support from the Fenian Memorial Committee of America, local AOH divisions, and Cashman descendants. Fenian Thomas McCarthy Fennell was crucial to laying the practical plan for the Catalpa Rescue before John Devoy and John Boyle O'Reilly, due to his experience in Fremantle Prison. He settled as a city official in Elmira, New York, and died on the 23rd of February 1914 at 72. Resting now beneath a stone in St. Peter and Paul's Cemetery, New York. The men who cut the telegraph wires, John Stephen Walsh and Dennis Florence McCarthy, which bought vital hours while the Catalpa Six rode to freedom, quietly retreated from history. Walsh rests in an unmarked grave in Cavalry Cemetery, Queens, and McCarthy's grave remains quietly lost. Judge John Goff was a master fundraiser for the Catalpa ship. He became a feared anti-corruption lawyer and respected New York Supreme Court judge. He died on 9th of November 1924 and rests in Kensico Cemetery, Valhalla, New York. Thomas Brennan remained in New York and became a court officer of the New York State Supreme Court. He was expelled from Clonagale for his conduct aboard the Catalpa ship. He married around 1880 and had 9 children. He suffered from paralysis and died in 1915. He's buried in St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx. Dennis Duggan died on September the 9th, 1884, aged just 42 years old. He was suffering from tuberculosis. His last request was to return home to Ireland. His corpse was pulled in an open hearse. Numbers in attendance swelled to 15,000. Samuel Smith, who became the unsung hero of the Catalpa Rescue, lived out his later years quietly as a mariner. He died on 19th of August 1909 in Seattle, Washington, of heart failure, aged 63. In 1908, he was honoured by the San Francisco Clan na Gael chapter the Knights of the Red Branch, who presented him with a medal inscribed for heroic services as first officer of the Catalpa. He is buried next to his wife in Edgartown Village Cemetery, Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Thomas Desmond returned to California. He was elected as the 12th Sheriff of San Francisco in 1879 on the Working Men's Party of California ticket, who were an anti-immigrant, anti-Chinese party. In the 1880s, he was associated with the Dynamite Campaign in England. He died in 1910 at the age of 72. He is buried in Holy Cross Cemetery, Colma, California. Clan na Gael's San Francisco branch organised a major tribute to him. His funeral was described as that of an Irish chief in the days of old. Fenian John King, who worked in the shadows fundraising with logistics and underground support for the Catalpa Rescue. He had raised significant gold from New Zealand miners, has been forgotten by history after 1876. His grave remains unknown or lost. Of the Catalpa 6, Michael Harrington, the oldest of the prisoners, married shortly after arriving in New York. He had 2 children and served on the Central Park Police Force. He was the first prisoner to die of pneumonia in 1886 and was buried in New York's Cavalry Cemetery. Thomas Hassett also settled in New York. He married and kept a saloon on Sullivan Street in Lower Manhattan. Dying in 1893 in East Harlem, his funeral was attended by a large number of nationalists. Like Michael Harrington, he's buried in Calvary Cemetery. Both new headstones were erected by the Fenian Memorial Committee of America on 15th of October 2022. Robert Cranston settled in West Kensington, Philadelphia. He married and took up police service as a special officer. By 1910, he was widowed. He died in 1914. He is buried in the Most Holy Redeemer Cemetery, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Thomas Dara settled in Philadelphia with Robert Cranston. He worked as a wool merchant and lived in rooming houses in the Center City and South Philadelphia. He also remained active in Clan na Gael activities. He died 6th of August 1912, aged 78, and rests in Greenmount Cemetery, Philadelphia. Martin Hogan married and had 2 daughters. He settled in Chicago, Illinois. He resumed his trade as a painter. He often moved around a slum area of Chicago City in poverty. He was a long-term patient of Cook County Hospital. He died there on 26th of November 1901, aged 68. He lay in an unmarked pauper's grave for decades. A proper headstone was finally placed on his grave in October 2015 by the Fenian Memorial Committee of Chicago. James Wilson settled in Central Falls, Pawtucket, Rhode Island. He married, raised a family, and worked quietly as a mill hand. Despite lifelong health issues from years of harsh imprisonment, he lived long enough to see the 1916 Easter Rising and the declaration of the Irish Republic in 1919, even meeting De Valera on his American trip. He died on the 6th of November 1921, aged 89, and rests in Old St. Mary's Cemetery, Pawtucket, Rhode Island, where the voice from the tomb finally rested. John Breslin, the ultimate escape artist who'd humiliated the British Empire not once but twice, continued to be a very active Clan na Gael member. He was the business manager for John Devoy's first newspaper, The Irish Nation. He wrote a particularly strong defence of the Invincibles and the Phoenix Park assassinations. He was for a period in charge of the John Philip Holland Fenian submarine project. At age 54, he died at his New York home in 1887 and was buried at Calvary Cemetery, New York City.
An unbreakable revolutionary whose spirit of resistance could never be shackled.
Captain George S. Anthony, the man who sailed around the world and stared down the guns of the British Empire, served quietly with the New Bedford Night Police before being appointed as New Bedford's Port Inspector. An irony in the fact that the importer of Irish Fenians was now in charge of US Customs in the area. He published in 1897 the first book account of the Catalpa, written by journalist Z.W. Peace. In 1909, the Connecticut Clan na Gael raised enough money for Captain Anthony to pay off the mortgage on his new home. Captain George S. Anthony is buried with his wife in New Bedford.
And you can see here Eamon de Valera visiting his grave. We visited the grave earlier on with the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick.
Captain Anthony was proof that an ordinary man, when moved by justice, could deliver the most extraordinary blow in the cause of liberty. The Catalpa ship was presented to Captain Anthony, John Richardson, and Henry Hathaway in lieu of payment. She was eventually sold and turned into a coal barge. Not of great value in this capacity, the Catalpa was finally condemned at the port of Belize, British Honduras.
John Devoy was a hero. Bold, ambitious, politically astute, John Devoy rose to lead Clan na Gael, transforming it into the driving force of Irish resistance abroad, with its influence reaching so deeply into Ireland that Patrick Pearse himself, from 1916, called him the greatest of the Fenians. Spanning 2 revolutions, John Devoy's legacy was sealed as he helped fund and plan the Easter Rising of 1916, years later, ensuring that the fight for Irish independence would never fade. My great-granduncle took part in that 1916 Easter Rising.
Devoy raised substantial funds of $100,000 between 1913 to 1916. In today's money, that would be over $3 million. He organised armed shipments from Germany and maintained close contact with IRB leaders. When Fenian Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa died, John Devoy and Thomas J. Clark in 1915 made sure that the Fenian Rossa laid one final devastating spark for Irish history, even more potent than the dynamite campaign, by shipping his body home to Ireland. 20,000 mourners formed the cortege through Dublin, with thousands more lining the streets in open defiance. At Glasnevin on 1st of August, Patrick Pearse seized the graveside moment to deliver one of the most incendiary orations ever spoken, turning the funeral into a dress rehearsal, an emotional springboard for the 1916 Easter Rising.
They have left us our Fenian dead, and while Ireland holds these graves, Ireland, unfree, shall never be at peace.
In 1924, after 50 years in exile, John Devoy lived to see his life's dream sort of fulfilled, returning to a partially liberated Ireland. But it was proof that his relentless fight had not been in vain.
Eliza Kenny had waited years and eventually married another, while John Devoy had married the movement. When he finally returned to Ireland in 1924, after 58 years, the elderly widow Eliza sought him out. They met once more in Naas and corresponded quietly until her death.
This is the grave of John Devoy. For 60 years he fought against the British Empire.
John Devoy died on the 29th September 1928 in Atlantic City, and now rests beneath a plain stone in Glasnevin Cemetery, Dublin. Devoy was the Fenian who outlasted empires, who outfoxed the British government, who asked for nothing in return.
Even his enemies acknowledged his impact. If you ever want to be complimented, it's what your enemies say about you, right? So wait till you hear what the London Times said when John Devoy died. The London Times branded John Devoy as the most dangerous enemy of Britain which Ireland has produced since Wolfe Tone. I'd say John Devoy would have been absolutely delighted with that. It was an epithet he would have worn like a badge of honour, a final victory in a sense.
He really was the greatest of the Fenians.
So the statue of the Catalpa 6 in Fremantle stands as a poignant tribute to the indomitable spirit of the Irish exiles. This is the statue. It's often likened to the wild geese who fled their homeland in search of freedom. The Catalpa 6 were driven from home, condemned for their struggle against tyranny. Their rescue reminds us of a truth that echoes through Irish history, that a single day of freedom is worth more than a lifetime of chains. The statue signifies not just their daring escape, but the enduring Irish spirit that soars like the wild geese, unbroken, undeterred, forever yearning for liberty, no matter the distance or the odds. It's a powerful reminder, even in the darkest cell, hope takes flight. Whatever obstacles life ever throws your way, may you always find the courage, like the Catalpa 6 did, to find them. Thank you very much.
Lift up your head. Remember all the tears we shed. Though tyrants marched where heroes bled, their chains shall rust, their power fled.
From broken stone and suffering's den, we rise as we have risen when the old